We have known Corwin Smith for quite a few years, and he is the co-founder of Culture to Cash. He's an absolutely outstanding business coach, and we know that personally. He specializes in strategic planning and growth. For nearly a decade, Corwin has been offering a wealth of experience guiding CEOs and leadership teams of companies to build successful teams, resulting in high performance businesses. We are absolutely thrilled to death to have Corwin here today to chat up to our EstimateRocket community some great pearls of wisdom. How you doing, Corwin?
Excellent. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
We're glad
Great to
to
have
have you.
Yeah.
We're going to turn it over to you, Corwin.
Cool. I think I just need a screen share turned on.
Oh, yeah. 1 second.
Thanks.
Presenter. There you go.
Awesome.
Is that giving you a hard time about sharing?
Yeah, just 1 second. The security stuff here is freaking out, but we'll get through it. You know what? I'm gonna have to quit and join back in. I apologize.
Yeah, just loop back around.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, with all the high security these days, all of these applications that require screen sharing make you basically exit your program and come back in before you can actually do it. So, Corwin will be right back with us. Hopefully everybody's enjoying the day so far. Seems to be cruising along. Anybody has any additional questions, even questions, if we didn't give everybody's contact information, don't hesitate to reach out to us with the chat bot. We can always get you in touch with anybody here today. And now I will turn it over to, let me, hang on, gonna make you the presenter. There you go. Should be good to go.
Awesome. Clearly not a tech expert, so.
It's all right. That's why we're here.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, let's let this thing load. There we go. All right, so conversation today is around the question here, which really centers on what the EstimateRocket user conference is about scaling up and soaring. And so what we're going to talk about here briefly is really simply, how do you scale up your business? And the key here is without blowing up. What many entrepreneurs encounter is they reach a certain stage of growth where it feels like, if I add another person or I add another customer, this just might break. And so what we're going to talk about today is, how do you scale your business in a way that actually creates more autonomy or more freedom for you, more profitability, and ultimately more enjoyment. As Tom and Kathy mentioned, my name is Corwin Smith. I'm with Culture to Cash. 30-second highlight or background on me. Married, live in Arizona in the desert. My wife and I are raising 4 boys. And Before I got into business coaching or consulting, I actually owned a disaster restoration company here in the Phoenix area. We were specialized in emergency fire and flood restoration in both residential and commercial settings. Founded it in 2009, sold the company in 2016, and for the last 8 years, I've been helping business owners scale up really simply without blowing up. I've helped over 80 companies now in multiple industries solve for sustainable growth. This is just a handful of companies I've worked with in the past, and really high level, I only share these results because I think it's important to know. Our customers report that through the processes and the tools that we help them implement inside of their business, they actually find themselves with 40% more freedom or autonomy. Said another way, they have 40% less time to manage the day-to-day. Commonly, they double their profit within 2 to 3 years of working with us, and they're seeing anywhere from a 500 to 800% increase in business value, or said like a business school person, enterprise value. So some data first, though. So this is actually data from the U.S. Census Bureau. And this was a survey of over 28 million firms in the U.S. specifically. And what you're going to notice here is out of the 28 million firms, roughly 4% of them, only 4% of 28 million firms ever make it past $1 million in revenue. So chances are, if you're an EstimateRocket user, you've already crossed this $1 million threshold, which is amazing. And what's interesting is they also identify that there's these valleys of death that companies go through and they get stuck. Now, you all may have heard the old adage that you're either growing or dying. And so what happens to these companies that, maybe reach $1 million or $2 million and they plateau? Here's might be what happens.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here. And if you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds,
You see the movies, you hear the stories. I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like in the world.
So sometimes what it feels like as a business owner or business leader is we're kind of cat herders. Whether we're trying to herd our employees or we're trying to herd our customers, it feels like chaos. So what's interesting is every company really goes through 4 major stages of growth. The first is a startup phase, and this is when a company's just trying to get momentum and really survive. And then once it starts to get some initial customers, starts to build momentum, they go into a growth phase. And then a scale phase is where they maybe go from incremental growth to dramatic 20, 30, 40% growth a year, and then finally reach the maturity phase. But what's interesting about this maturity phase is the maturity phase is actually a myth. What actually happens is when companies hit this plateau, they reach an inflection point. And at this inflection point, what tends to happen with companies is they get caught in that valley of death, and it's usually a slow, protracted death, or they make a choice. And they're able to make a mental shift as not just the business owner, but the leadership team to regain momentum and make it through the next ceiling or valley of death. So the fact is, as you're growing your company, you're going to inevitably hit these invisible ceilings or what may feel like a valley of death. And so what we're going to cover is how do you get through these valleys of death? As mentioned, many companies start up. There's roughly 1,000 startups an hour globally. It's pretty crazy, right? But the fact is, very few scale up. And why are scale ups important? There was a study done by the London Business School, an economist there, and what the economists identified, that it was these scale up companies that grow roughly 30% a year, for 3 consecutive years. He called them the gazelles. These companies that were the gazelles actually were the ones that created roughly 60% of new job growth. So 60% of new job growth is not created by, these big venture capital funded companies or the companies that you read about in the news or whatever it is. It's actually Main Street businesses like you all that choose to scale up. It's the lifeblood of the US economy. So the interesting thing is many start up, but few actually scale up. Now, I want you to think for a second. Imagine that, it's, 1935, and you're in the horse industry. Maybe you're a farrier, right? You put horseshoes on horses. Just imagine for a second what the prevailing story is in the industry about horses and being a farrier. I guess, I don't know for sure, that it's probably similar to the situation we're in right now with the rise of AI tools, that certain industries are going to disappear because of disruption, because of the automobile in this example. But here's what's interesting. You fast forward, this is the most recent data from 2019 I could find. The global equine industry, or the global horse industry, was worth $300 billion. Think about that for a second. Many people, I'd imagine, right, inside of the horse industry, maybe they were farriers or whatever it was, figured that their industry was going to disappear. But what's fascinating is the equine industry is actually thriving today at a tune of $300 billion. It just shifted and changed. So what I want you to consider here is that there literally are no bad industries. It's never an industry problem. It's actually a leadership problem. And that's the good news, because leadership comes down to you and also the people on your team. So the challenge is companies grow and scale, is it seems like more and more complexity compounds or grows. And so what we've done is we've simplified growth down to 4 simple decisions because, and I want you to write this down for yourself, complexity kills in business. Complexity kills in business. And so this is the genius of using a tool like EstimateRocket. One of the gifts of EstimateRocket is it helps simplify your business for scale. Because if your team's caught in complexity, chances are they're either going to freeze and do nothing, or they're just going to totally avoid the situation. It's human nature. So the 4 decisions we're looking at here are 4 simple decisions popularized by Vern Harnish, author of Scaling Up, a scaling up coach for 9 years, and still help companies implement scaling up today. And what Vern Harnish's book does is it takes this complex undertaking called scaling your business, given geopolitical situations, customer changes, market changes, employee changes, whatever it is, and gives you a simple framework to take a look at your business, identify what do we need to change inside of these 4 core areas. So the 4 areas really simply are people, strategy, execution, and cash. And we like to think of it as a really virtuous cycle, in that the right people inside of your company are the ones that are actually going to execute on your strategy. Your strategy defines where do you play and how do you win in the marketplace. Execution is all about delivering on this big long-term vision and plan, making it real, number one, but also reducing the day-to-day chaos in your business. And finally, cash. How do you not just keep your cash you have as you grow the business, but actually grow your cash as your business grows? Because growth sucks cash. And then finally, being able to pour that cash into hiring more of the right people. So I got a question for you here, and I want you to reflect on this. Would you, the key word here, would you enthusiastically, gladly rehire every member of your team today? If you're like most entrepreneurs and business owners that I talk to, the answer is simply no. And they've got a lot of stories about why they wouldn't, like, hey, it's hard to find people or whatever else. But I'm going to talk just here for a minute about the importance of building an A-player team and also some specific strategies to do it. So inside of our conversation today, I'm going to cite a few pieces from Jim Collins, his book, Good to Great. Good to Great is one of the core foundational books There's tools in there or mental models or frameworks that I help companies implement, because as far as I can tell, Good to Great is one of the most well-researched business books out there. They studied the stock market performance over roughly 70 years of companies, and so everything was public, everything was visible, and he identified that there was companies that beat their competitive companies over a period of roughly 70 years, right? They didn't just have one good year, they had, 60, 70 good years. So success leaves clues. And when you look at these companies on the stock market, no, they're nothing like, your painting company or even my restoration business. They're very different. They're much larger. However, there are principles of success inside that book that leave clues. And what Jim Collins said in Good to Great, which is so important, and if you get nothing else from what we talk about today, let this get burned into your mind. And he said this, he said, those who build great companies understand that the ultimate throttle on growth for any great company is not markets or technology or competition or products. It's one thing above all others, and it's the ability to get and keep enough of the right people. So the ability to get and keep enough of the right people is the ultimate throttle on how fast you can grow. So how do you do it? So this bus here, you may recognize it, you may not. This is from Ken Kesey and his band of merry pranksters. So Ken Kesey and his band of merry pranksters actually traveled around in the late 60s following the Grateful Dead. And what's interesting about the bus that applies directly to every business, yes, your painting business too, is that they had a saying about the bus, and the saying was really simple. And they said, if you're the wrong person and you get on the bus, you're going to mess up the vibe. If you're the wrong person and you get on the bus, you're going to mess up the vibe. And so when you think about your company, I want you to think about it like this bus, and that there's a series of questions here to help get the right people on the bus, in the right seats, ultimately doing the right things, and finally the right things right. Now the key here is the first question, which is, how do I get the right people on the bus? Well, let's talk just for 1 second about the cost of the wrong people. I've hired the wrong people before, right? I'm as guilty as anyone else. And it's because I had a lack of a practice to hire the right people or a process to hire the right people. So what's interesting is the cost of a bad hire. This is data according to Top Grading by Brad Smart. For an entry-level role, it's roughly 1 times their annual pay. So you think someone you pay $22, $24 an hour, it could cost you roughly $50,000. Salesperson, 5 times their annual pay. Mid-manager, 15 times their base salary. And key executive, so someone you bring into your leadership team, could cost you 27 times their base salary. Now, I've seen this vary, from 1 times annual pay and actual, bad estimates put out there, which turned into projects that were massive losers, to, theft and other things like that. So the question is, how do I get the right people on the bus? And so here's what I want you to think about. The first thing to consider when you think about getting the right people on the bus is, do you have a clear set of core ideologies or core beliefs that are shared by everyone? And the set of core beliefs are really 2 things. The first one is core values, which is, what are our handful of rules, our behavioral rules that if someone violates, they could be fired? And the second thing is our reason for existence beyond profit or jobs. People are definitely going to show up for a check, but if we want to get the extra discretionary effort, if you will, we're going to have a really clear, energizing purpose or reason for existence for the organization. So if you got core values, I want you to take a moment and check in with yourself around this. Number 1, do your core values give your individuals on your team a performance edge, or are they just table stakes, meaning no one would hire someone that lies or steals, right? Number 2, would you fire people for violating them? And number 3, would you take a significant financial hit to keep them alive? You'll notice here on the left is the double helix of the DNA, and I want you to think about your core values like the DNA of your body. And this is actually a process of discovery, but it's also self-replicating. These are the values that we want to continue to self-replicate inside of our organization. By the way, these here are a set of core values from Enron. It came from their last shareholder statement. And they're nice sounding things like respect and integrity and communication and excellence. So as you look at your values, I want you to consider that they're not, platitudes or virtues, but it's actually who you are as an organization when you're at your best and you're willing to manage people to it. And then the second piece here for getting the right people on the bus is the 20-to-1 rule. So what that means, for every single person you need to hire, you should be interviewing about 20 people. So the question I have for you right now is, when you're going to interview, do you have a broad enough selection in place to be able to have roughly 20 applicants that you could interview for your role so you could select the one? If not, chances are you're going to end up desperate. So that's the first question. The second question is, what are my right seats? So I've done all the work, and I've gone through and I've identified, we got clear values. We're interviewing roughly 20-to-1 or at least 10 or 15-to-1. So we found the right person. Now the big question is, what seat do I put them in? And so when we start to look at the right seats, the first place we look at is a function-based org chart. So many org charts are based on people's names, and that's it. So when you look at a function-based org chart, you look at the key functions that drive your business, whether it's sales or marketing or operations, sometimes called production, accounting, finance, organizing your business based on function, and then putting a name in, and then what are the top 2 to 3 measurables for each function in the business. What this does, it helps create a structure for your business that scales with your business. Third thing is, are the right people in each seat? This is a big question, and it's one that I often ask leaders, and they just kind of look at me like that with a blank stare. So the question here is, are the right people in each seat? And there's a really simple assessment. I'd suggest you take 5 or 10 minutes here in the next day or two to perform this assessment on everyone that reports directly to you. Here's why. The first thing you're going to do is you're just going to choose a member of your team. Let's say the person's name is Kyle. If you have clearly identified core values, it's really easy. Scale of 0 to 100. How do they do living the core values? And then 0 to 100, how productive they are. And they're going to end up in one of these 4 quadrants, A, B, or a C performer. So once you get your team plotted, you need to do something about it. And here's what you do. And this is really the cheat code, if you will. The first thing is your A players. The biggest risk you have in your business today, and it's not competitors and it's not markets, is actually losing A players. Now the irony is where you spend the most time as a leader or manager is where? It's almost always on your C players. The irony is your C players are the people that are your lowest performers, number one, and number two, they're probably your least profitable people. The A players need very little management. They need very little support. They just get it done, and they get it done at a high level. So the first thing to do is to find out, how do I retain and ultimately clone my A players? The next thing is with my B players, and the way I like to look at B performers is, man, they fit the culture. They're just not totally up to speed or highly productive in their job yet. And so there's 1 of 2 plays there. The first play is maybe there's actually a different seat where they thrive, or I need to coach them up to perform and become an A player. Now, what's interesting here is there's this line right through the middle there when you look at core values at about 50%. And this is kind of the break point for me, where I say that if anyone falls below 50% on living the values most of the time, they're a C player. And we need to find a way to cut or replace them. Now, I'm not saying just go fire all your C players tomorrow. I'd suggest actually something different, because it honors their humanity. And in some cases, C players just haven't been told that they're underperforming. And it's this. The individuals on your team that are A, B, or C players, spend time. It doesn't have to be much time. Send me an email, and I got a really simple framework for monthly coaching conversations to coach them up or ultimately coach them out. And ultimately what that does is it builds an environment to recruit and retain top talents. Really simply, A players want to work with other A players. How about that? And then finally, we leverage in-depth behavioral and psychological assessments to match the right people in the right seats. Now, what's interesting is many times when you have C players, in many cases, you hired on a C player. They didn't like start as an A player and then become a C player. Generally, they probably were already a C player. So we strongly suggest using assessments early on in the hiring process, but also using them in the coaching and management process. Number 4, are the right people doing the right things? So when you look at your company, there's a series of seats inside your company, and it's common for leaders and organizations to have job descriptions. My challenge I've always faced with job descriptions is I haven't been able to manage people to them. So what we suggest instead is create job scorecards, and this comes again from Top Grading by Brad Smart, is creating a really simple job scorecard that we can use in the hiring process, the screening process, the onboarding process, and then ultimately the management or coaching process of every individual on the team. And it outlines 4 key things. Number 1 is, why does the role exist? In 1 sentence or less. Number 2 is, what does this role get paid to do? Number 3, what skills does someone need to be successful? And then number 4 is, how do we measure success? You would be shocked with the level of clarity job scorecards create for individuals on the team, but also leaders. And we have many cases of leaders implementing job scorecards with people that were underperforming, and voila, these people start to become A players because they've got clarity on what it looks like to win. And then number 2 is they've actually been coached into their best performance. And then finally, number 5, really simple. And again, this is the genius of using EstimateRocket, is you can actually measure, are the right people doing the right things right? And so every single person in your company should have 3 to 5 numbers or KPIs or metrics that they report on at least weekly that helps them know personally, am I having a good day or week? And as a manager, I can know really quickly, are they having a good day or week? And if you need help developing KPIs, EstimateRocket has a whole batch of them. You can check out kpilibrary.com. But here's the thing I want you to consider when you think about the people decision is that every winning team has 3 things. Number 1 is they have players. You guys have players. You have employees. Number 2 is a playbook, which we're going to talk about developing the playbook. And then number 3 is no winning team has a manager. They actually have a coach. And so how much time are you spending as a leader or manager coaching your team rather than trying to micromanage or babysit? So I'm going to give you just 30 seconds here to write down, what's your one thing you need to implement from this people discussion that we've had briefly today that will change your business for the better? So I'm going to give you just 30 seconds to write down, what's your one thing from the people decision? Perfect. So we got people covered, and let's talk about strategy. Strategy is a big term. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. Here's how we define strategy really simply. Number 1 is, where do you play in the marketplace? Number 1, where do you actually play in the marketplace? And then more importantly is, how do you win? How do you win? So what's fascinating is I was actually meeting with a business owner yesterday. He's a remodeling contractor, and we were having this exact discussion. And he said he's an immigrant from Mexico, and he said, Corwin, he said, for so long, because it was his belief as an immigrant, when I came here to the U.S., my belief was like, I just need to do as much as possible to make money and win in the marketplace. He's like, what I've uncovered and discovered for myself is actually there's a narrow band of the market, or a small subset of the market where I should be playing, but ultimately where I can win. And then the second piece here is, do your people know how your company is different from the competition? So let's talk about this a little bit more in depth. So when it comes down to market position or strategic positioning, you only have 2 different choices. The first choice on the left is to be the lowest cost provider. Now, you guys are in a situation where you give a bid to a customer, and if your customer is not clear why your company is superior, Brandon talked about this inside of the marketing and sales conversations, which was brilliant. Thank you, Brandon. If your customers don't have a clear reason why your offer is superior to the competitors, then they're forced to price. They're forced to choose low price. Or is your company truly different? And the key here is differentiation that's valuable. So when you think about differentiation, I want you to think about this rule from strategy, which is the 770 rule. As I mentioned earlier, that there's no bad industries, there's just bad leaders. And so when you take a look at the total market, there's probably roughly 7% of any market that is the market you want to go after, and then building a strategy around capturing what we call monopoly control, 70% control of that marketplace. What that does is it drives your business value through the roof, but what it also does is it helps you own a narrow niche of the market where the profit is. And, you know, really simply, there's pools of profit in every single industry, as I mentioned. Another book reference here, Herman Simon, he wrote a book called Hidden Champions of the 21st Century. And Herman's book is about these companies from Europe and Germany specifically that are the companies that are not in the news. You don't hear about them on social media, but they're the ones that are earning the biggest profits, and they're relatively unknown. And he shares the case here of a strategy of Winterhalter. So Winterhalter was a dishwasher manufacturer. And what they chose was they chose to do a deep strategy rather than a broad strategy like I shared about with the client that I was working with yesterday. So they manufacture dishwashers. What's interesting about dishwashers is there's 5 big, we could say, commercial uses for dishwashers. And there's a tendency for companies to say, well, we could sell dishwashers to these 5 different customers, and we need to capture as many customers as possible, so we're going to sell them to everyone. But Winterhalter did instead. It said, hey, no, we're going to develop dishwashers here for hotels and restaurants, because we know if a hotel and restaurant dishwasher goes down, it costs them money. And then we're going to develop water conditioners and detergents and service. Now, what's interesting is when they went to scale, rather than adding on more services or more products, you could say, is they actually just went into different markets. And so Winterhalter is actually executing a global domination strategy around dishwashers for hotels and restaurants. What this does is this creates a narrow focus for your team from a delivery perspective, simplicity. Think about like In-N-Out burgers or even Chick-fil-A. And then it also creates a powerful brand identity. So how do you identify where to play? Again, I'm going to make another shameless pitch here for EstimateRocket, but going through and looking through your customers, you could look over a period of 1 or 2 or 3 years and identify who are our most profitable customers, number one. You'll notice here waterfall graphs. On the right side is the customers that were unprofitable or possibly costed us money. We don't want more of them. The customers that were most profitable, how do we capture more of them? And this is really the kind of strategic thinking that you have to be in, is these were our most profitable customers. What did they care about? And how do we win with those customers and let these other customers be served by Chuck in a truck like that? So that wraps up the strategy decision. I'm going to give you just 30 seconds here to reflect. We covered a lot. And again, this is a fire hose approach that we're doing today. But what's the one thing that you need to dive deeper into when it comes down to strategy for your business? So I'm just give you 30 seconds here to write and reflect. All right, so it's people, strategy. The next thing we're going to talk about or look at here is execution. And the key question here with execution is this. Do you have relentless repeatability inside of your business, number one? And even bigger than that, are all processes running without drama? Now, when I say drama, hopefully there's not employee drama of people not getting along or culture issues, but I mean, constantly firefighting with customer issues or customer breakdowns. And then the second piece here is your business delivering industry-leading profitability. If you're not earning 2 to 3 times industry average profits, you've got some work to do here in the execution section. Again, I'm going to share another book. So this is by W. Edwards Deming. He wrote a book called Out of the Crisis, and Deming was the management consultant that the U.S., you could say, deployed over to Japan after World War II. Deming is largely credited for taking the Japanese culture and helping them create Kaizen or Six Sigma or lean manufacturing, lean thinking and principles. And he wrote a book called Out of the Crisis about his experience over in Japan and helping revive that nation economically. And what he said was this, and this is what I think is so important from an execution perspective, is he said 94% of failures of workers' performance is actually determined by the system they work within. So when you think about execution, I want you to think about the system that your team works within, and is it simple enough and clear enough and repeatable enough that they can be successful? If not, you've probably got work to do from an execution perspective, and it really comes down to focus and discipline. Again, complexity kills. So when we think about complexity killing, do we have focus and discipline? So inside of Jim Collins' book, he shares a parable of the hedgehog and the fox. Now, what's fascinating about the hedgehog and the fox is this, is these good to great companies, the companies that became great, they developed a hedgehog concept and they beat the foxes. Now, I don't know if you've ever held one of these hedgehogs, but as you can see here, they're tiny. I mean, their mouths are tiny. Like, they are very small, you could say weak animals. However, what's fascinating is the hedgehog always beats the fox. Hedgehog's natural prey for a fox, but the fox never gets the hedgehog. And what Jim Collins said is there's a really core reason, and I want you all to consider this inside of your business. The reason why the hedgehog always beats the fox is because the hedgehog has mastered one big thing and ignored the rest, while the fox knows many things. And so what's interesting is when we're in the startup phase, many times we have to be like a fox. We have to be fast moving. We have to be cunning to be able to get that initial momentum. But to become a scale up, we need to learn to master one big thing as an organization. Here's another look at it. This is the sun, by the way. This is like, I don't know what they call the kind of imaging, but every minute the sun puts off roughly 174 quadrillion watts. So I want you to think about this, about focus and execution for your company. So the sun puts off 174 quadrillion watts. I live in Phoenix, so as you could imagine, I go outside during the summer. I don't put sunscreen on. I get a really bad sunburn. Uncomfortable, right? But the interesting thing is this laser here that cuts stainless steel. So the sun puts off 174 quadrillion watts. Worst case, I go outside. I'm out there for an hour. I might get a sunburn. This laser here puts off about 75 watts and cuts stainless steel. So ask yourself, what's the difference? And I would say it's the power of focus. You and your team do not have unlimited resources. So execution is about creating focus, and there's really three key disciplines here of execution. Number one is, what are the priorities for the company? How do we translate our long-range strategy, where we're going to play, and how do we win in the marketplace, into a really simple focus for the next 90 days? I love this. How many balls do we have flying in the air? Or this squirrel, right? Or raccoon. I was going to take over the world, but then I saw another shiny object. So when you think about priorities, I want you to think about it this way. Right at the foundation is your BHAG or your vision for your organization. Where are we going? Supported by our core values, our mission, our milestone getting to the BHAG, and ultimately our purpose or reason for existence. Really clear 3-year objectives or outcomes chunked down into what do we got to focus on 2025, lined up to hit that BHAG. What do we got to focus on this quarter to hit the year, to hit the 3, to hit the vision, monthly, all the way down into action items. So the path to execution is really simple in achieving your plan. Inside of scaling up is the vision summary, and it really outlines simply in one page here for yourself, but also your team, so everyone can be aligned around the same things. Where are we going, and ultimately, how do we get there? So creating alignment. Number 2 is data or metrics to create clarity and foresight. I love this. This was another W. Edwards Deming quote, the guy that helped turn Japan around. And he said, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." So again, every person in the company has 3 to 5 numbers. They can answer simply, and you can answer simply. Did they have a good day or week? And then finally, the KPI library. This is a great resource to help. EstimateRocket team, again, has great resources to help you. What are the handful of KPIs for my people so I can keep them aligned around where we're going and are we on track or off track to get there? And then finally, meeting rhythms. The meeting rhythms are all about better, faster decisions. And there's really 4 core meeting rhythms to be focused on. A daily huddle, really about tactics and communication. A weekly rhythm is checking in on how are we doing with our quarterly priorities and having debate about where should we be focused. A monthly meeting with the executive team for learning, but also for solving big issues. And then finally, once a quarter, setting a new quarterly plan, refocusing the team on achieving our objectives for the year, the 3-year, and ultimately the big, hairy, audacious goal. So I'm going to give you just 30 seconds here to reflect. What was the one thing that spoke to you inside of the execution section that you need to be focused on immediately to improve your execution, to get all of your processes running without drama and ultimately driving industry-leading profitability? And last but not least, I'd say most important is cash. So when you think about cash, I want you to think about cash like oxygen for your business. The faster your company grows, the faster it's going to suck cash. And so the question here to ask is, do you have consistent sources of cash, hopefully internally? Could be you work with a bank, but that gets expensive sometimes. But do you have consistent sources of cash to fuel growth? If not, then pay attention. So I want you to write this one down. Revenue's vanity, profit's sanity, and ultimately cash is king. Revenue's vanity, profit's sanity, and ultimately cash is king. What's interesting is I participate in some various entrepreneur groups, and every now and then someone will come in here and they'll beat their chest about what their revenue was, whatever the number is. But no one asks the follow-on question is, how much did you profit and ultimately how much cash did your business produce last year? I had a friend in this situation. I ran into him about, it was probably 3 years ago. He's telling me about how much revenue his business was doing that year and it's going to double. And I asked him really simple, what's happened to your profit? And he said, oh, like we're operating on, get ready for it, volume. I said, what do you mean? He said, we're going to make up our profits in volume. Fast forward 2 years later, I saw him at another entrepreneur event, and he'd shut that part of his business down because he figured out that you cannot grow a business and make up your profit in volume. So I want to introduce some new math to you, and it's 1% times 1% times 1% equals 19%, or $950,000. I'm going to show you how. So this is a really simple income statement or profit and loss statement for a company. They're doing $10 million in gross sales. Their cost of goods sold is about 50% at $5 million. Their general and administrative expense is $4 million, and their net income is 10% or $1 million. You could say it's a good business. It's healthy. But let's look at the impact of a few 1% changes. So the first 1% change is looking at $10 million. And when we look at our pricing, how often are you all cutting price to win bids? Because what's interesting here is every 1% you cut your price is 1% off the bottom line. Every 1% you increase your price is an additional 1% to your bottom line. It cuts both ways. So the first thing we looked at here is $10 million business. We raised the prices across the board, 1%. We have an extra $100,000 to the bottom line at the end of the year. Achievable. Cost of goods sold. Can we cut our cost of goods sold by 1%? I'd say most companies can. An extra $50,000 to the bottom line. Can we cut our G&A, general administrative? Think about, overhead, staff, things like that. Can we cut our general administrative expenses, our overhead, by 1%, $40,000? And what it ultimately turns into is a 19% improvement in our profitability or net income. equivalent to $190,000. Now, Corwin, where did you come up with the 950? Really easy. Commonly, companies that are about $10 million in revenue trade for about 5 times earnings or net profit. So what we've done is we've effectively, with 3 small moves on the financials, grown the value of the business by $950,000. How about that? So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to reflect. When we look at cash, what's the one thing that you need to change here in the near future related to cash? And I'd encourage all of you to take a look at your pricing. Is there a way for you to increase your price by 1 or 2%? All right, so we covered cash. And finally, I want to review real quick those 4 simple decisions. People is all about happiness. Do I enjoy the people I work with? Strategy answers a simple question. Are we growing as fast as we'd like? Execution, are all the trains running on time without drama? And then finally, do we have adequate sources of cash to fuel growth? And if you'd like to learn more, feel free to get a copy of Scaling Up, or I got you an offer at the end here. I've got piles of these books. I'm the Scaling Up missionary. Would be glad to send you a copy, my free gift to you. So I want you to consider that no one has ever achieved peak performance without a coach. This is from Andre Agassi. So I'd have you consider who's coaching you, and ultimately, are you or is someone else coaching your team to achieve peak performance? And here's the big question. How much of what we've talked about did you already know? Probably most of it, right? Nothing I talked about today is breakthrough, revolutionary, because it's by small and simple things that big changes happen. But here's what I want you to consider. There's a big difference between knowing and doing. And that's where coaching comes in. So really simply, if you want to 10x the company, you have to 10x the people. So really quick, a little bit about me, 3 core things that make us different. Number 1 is we have a no-fail guarantee. When clients engage with us, you literally can't fail unless you choose to do nothing, right? Which rarely happens. Number 2, we work with proven tools. And then ultimately, I shared with you about client results. So if you'd like to learn more, feel free to reach out. If you'd like a free copy of the book, by the way, send me a text message or an email with Scaling Up book and your address, and I'd be happy to drop one in the mail. Appreciate you guys.
Oh, and that was awesome. Sounded really familiar.
Yeah, how about that?
I've worked with Corwin and been through what he's talking about, and it really does work. And there's a real process, and Corwin has a unique set of values himself, and is someone that is very unique in that integrity, in the integrity department. I'll call it that. And
thank you, Tom.
And absolutely worth reaching out to and talking to. Yeah, that's and Roger asked if you mentioned a template for regular coaching meetings. How can I get that?
Yeah.
I'm sure Corwin would be happy to shoot that out to you, Roger. If you want, I'll shoot him your email address and he can send that directly to you.
Yeah, please, Roger, feel free to send me an email or text, and I can send you the template for regular coaching meetings with your team. Glad to help.
And even that, I will agree, is very helpful tool. Not too many meetings, but just enough meetings is
just
really
enough.
The secret.
Just enough.
Really
awesome.
And even as you said, evaluating that periodically to say, hey, do we have one too many there? Sure,
Mm-hmm.
And it helps to have much higher quality meetings and getting a lot more out of them. So
yep, agreed.
And Corwin, I just want to interject here and say I really like the meeting rhythms with the KPIs, because then you're not just meeting to meet. You know what you have to report. You know what's important to your boss. Yeah. And so that even keeps the meetings from running too long as well.
Thank you, Kathy. Agreed. Yeah.
Right. And you can't bull your way through KPIs.
The numbers don't lie, right?
No.
Yeah, the numbers don't lie.
Right. I just want to ask, is it cool in Arizona right now? I see that you have on a coat.
Well, Kathy, cool for me or cold for me is about 60 degrees, but yeah, we've been down in
Oh,
the week, so I'm freezing.
yeah. You don't know what freezing is.
Oh my gosh, I know. I've been back there to Newburyport during the real cold, and my
Right.
goodness, it's yeah. So 60 degrees is freezing for me in Arizona. Yeah,
Not a happy place.
yeah, exactly.
Cool. Any other questions? We're going to be here for a couple more minutes. As I said, we've worked together, and the program is probably the most made the most sense to me out of any of the coaching programs that I've participated in, and it's about it's about organizational. I would call it organizational coaching as opposed to sales coaching or marketing coaching or production coach. It's about being able to get your leadership team to perform the way they need to perform, and setting up the layers of metrics required to keep people moving forward and growing.
Yeah, it's really great. Thanks for sharing that, Tom. Yeah, commonly clients we work with still have a sales coach, or in some cases an executive coach, which is perfect because they go really deep. And yeah, someone like a Brandon that really is expert with sales training, that's awesome. Right. And it's important. Very, very important part of business growth.
Just like football teams have a head coach, and they've got an offensive coach and a defensive coach and a special teams coach. They all have different specialties for sure.
That's right. Yeah.
So yes, Nathan asked, can I set up a meeting with EstimateRocket to optimize my business and process with EstimateRocket?
There you go.
Unquestionably. Nathan, just basically in the little chat window, we can set up a meeting for you if you just request a training, and we can talk you through how to use all the pieces that you have available for tools to get that going. Yep.
Amazing. Yeah. And please y'all, that's the genius of having a platform or a tool like EstimateRocket, is just such clear data and visibility and optimization of processes, so you can deliver a wow experience to customers without having to have your team rely on 72 different things. A handful of key things delivers a wow experience, and then as a leader or an executive or business owner, you have the data to be able to monitor, are the people doing the right things right? Yeah.
Yeah. For sure. In fact, Nathan, that's right in, if you go into either in the app or in the website, and you click on the little chat smiley face there, there is right when it pops up, it says, have questions about EstimateRocket, schedule a one-on-one training session. And you can go and book a session there and just make a note of what you're looking for, and we'll help you out. All right.
Amazing.
William Freight's mentioned, thank you, Corwin, and he'll be reaching out to you.
Very cool. Yeah, glad to help. If you guys have questions or just want a quick sounding board, feel free to reach out, text or email, or a phone call. Appreciate you guys. I got to jam to another meeting. Thanks for having me, Tom and Kathy and EstimateRocket team.
Have a great day.
We'll see you soon.
Crush it today. Thank you.
Family, we said hello.